Coming up on the Men at the Movies podcast, I talk with Dustin Oprea about The Guardian. We look at the main character, Ben, as someone that we could become, an uninitiated man who allows his marriage to drown because he's so focused on rescuing others. He doesn't keep track of how many people he saved, but is haunted by the ghosts of the ones he didn't. We see a man whose calling is motivated by fear, and that causes him to hurt the people that matter most. Don't let go, and let's discover God's truth in this movie.
The movies and stories we love are gateways to see ourselves and God in new ways.
Every great story borrows its power from a larger story, the story that's written on our hearts and woven into the fabric of our very being.
Hello and welcome to the Men at the Movies podcast. My name is Paul McDonald, and joining me once again from Atlanta, it's Dustin Oprea. Hey, Dustin, how you doing this morning, man?
Hey, Paul. Yes, once again, we are here, and I'm honored to be a guest on this podcast with you again. I personally enjoy it, so you have a fan and have had a fan for a long time, and so it is such a blast to be able to see you right now and to talk about this movie today. As me and some friends have really, we've had conversations about this movie over the past few months too, and so I'm excited to talk about it with you.
Yeah, this is awesome. I hadn't seen it. I hadn't seen The Guardian. Oh, before we get talking about that, our listeners, if you've listened to our previous episodes, our voices may be a little more gravelly. We're both sort of recovering from something, but Dustin is the impressive one because Dustin a couple weeks ago got sick. Has some cough, has some junk going on. But he actually ran a 10K last weekend. I maybe haven't gone 10 kilometers in like outdoors in the year. So how did that go for you, Dustin?
It was a blast. That me and some brothers through a ministry that you're aware of. We have a mutual friend named Pablo.
Pablo's been on the podcast before with Wild Sons out there in Colorado.
That's right. So I've attended a retreat that they do. And just as a part of a brotherhood and a bit of a fundraiser for what they're planning in the future, there was a 10K that was run all over the country from California to South Carolina, really. And people gathered to run a 10K Sunday morning, a trail run. And it was great. Here in Georgia, we did a little trail run, and there was a handful of us that just got to run and share stories and pray and run for the people that we love. It was awesome.
That is awesome. It's really cool too, because like you mentioned, it was from Charleston, South Carolina to the coast of California. So it covered the entire country. So I was like, oh man, that's super awesome.
It was, we were really united as brothers, even though across a bunch of different time zones, we were all running for the same reason. We committed 10 weeks ago to run for specific people that we love. So every time we trained and when we came together on Sunday, we prayed over and prayed and ran for the people that we love. And some of that might dovetail into our conversation today, actually.
I know. I was just thinking, I feel like there's some sort of connection that I think over the course of our conversation, Jesus will probably make a little bit clearer than it is right now. Mm-hmm. So we're talking about The Guardian. It came out in 2006. The big stars are Kevin Costner and Ashton Kutcher. There's other guys that you'd recognize in the movie, but the sort of the thumbnail sketch of it, Kevin Costner is the old Coast Guard guy. He's a legend. He holds all the swim records. He's saved somewhere between 200 and 300 people is what they say. We don't really ever know. And Ashton Kutcher's the young up and coming, the new kid. He's passionate. He's a champion level swimmer. He ends up breaking all of Ben's swim records. And so this is the story of him going through training, right? Of they call it A school for the Coast Guard, and sort of like probably lone survivor or act of valor did for the SEALs. This is sort of with the Coast Guard. And so we're really going to focus on both Ben's character. Obviously, he's the main character of the movie, as well as Jake. But before we do that, Dustin, the question I like to lead off with when I remember is why this movie. You mentioned you've been talking about this for the last couple of months with some guys there in Georgia. Why this movie in particular? Rotten Tomatoes gave it like a 37. So it's not like one of those awesome, great stories, great movies. It has issues. I would have done things a little different, in my expert opinion. And for all that, I still got emotional at a couple scenes towards the end. So what is it about this movie that sparks your interest?
Yeah, I got emotional too. And yeah, I agree. It's not a movie that I think I've watched a ton. I remember when it came out, but my good friend here in Atlanta, his name's Alex Campbell. He's a huge fan of it, and we get together every other week, and with a handful of guys that have actually been a part of the Wild Sons retreat that Pablo does. We went out there last year, and so we get together every other week. And he brought the movie up a few months ago when I initially brought it up to you, and talked about a few scenes that really struck him. And so I watched it, and what I gravitated towards was, of course, the two main characters you just mentioned, Kevin Costner, who was Ben, and Ashton Kutcher, Jake, who are the main characters, but just tracking through their journey. And in the context of us, we follow Jesus, right? And this podcast is about leveraging movies that borrow any great movie or even average movie, like we're talking about.
We've done a couple bad movies, so it's okay. Any story that resonates.
Anything that is powerful in that movie, there's a layer deeper that borrows its power from the greater story that God is writing as our Father, and through Jesus and his work in his life, with the brotherhood he had, with his sacrifice, his death, his resurrection, and his ascension. There's layers deeper in the relationships of these movies that you've been talking about for several years now, Paul, that if we pause long enough and talk about it like we are, we can relate to either us with the Father or Jesus, or with a spouse or a best friend, or a tragedy that's happened in our life, because all movies have some sort of suffering and tragedy. Why? Well, that's what the Father did for us through Jesus in his life, his death, his resurrection, and ascension. And so there's power in all of this, not just because suffering, but there's also redemption. And so you see this character of Jake that comes in as this really cool guy that can get all the girls or any girl he wants. There's actually a scene in the movie that he's like, I bet I can get her in, I don't know, 60 seconds.
Minute, I think. Yeah,
something like that. And it's a pretty funny scene. And the character, the gal, really plays that really well. It's a bit of a surprise in the movie. But you see this guy's transition from being super self-centered to being others focused. And I think in my life as a 39-year-old, married for 15 years with 3 boys, I am very much in that season of maturing over the last 9 years of having kids, moving away from being self-centered in everything I do, training to be the husband that God meant me to be, the son that he meant me to be, and the father to my 3 boys. And it requires a lot of training and a lot of listening to other people who have messed up, and maybe were even taken out for a season of their life too, that we see in Ben's character that he was taken out.
Well, and it's interesting because as you talked about that, there's the character Charlie, this is his 3rd time through the A school. They call him three-peat. Talk about being taken out. There was some level. I was listening to a podcast the other day about this couple was talking about they were going through this series of testing, and they knew that their faith was being tested in the moment. And they're like, we really need to pass this because I don't want to go through this again. Right. Yes. And for whether it's, diet, exercise, there's a reason that every new year people talk about starting a new resolution. I'm going to change. I'm going to be different. But then when you get to a certain point and you fall off the rails, like it's really hard for Charlie to have gone back 3 times. Like, because this is, whether it's this basically the special forces level training, and he's going to pop up for us here a little bit in the conversation, but you mentioned, I think one of the key components of the story is Ben and his relationship with his wife. Early on in the movie, we see Ben, he's in the water. There's a couple, a husband and wife in the water. And what you see is the husband he's panicking because he's not a very good swimmer. So Ben is trying to save the wife, and the husband keeps climbing on his back, keeps doing stuff, pushes her out of the way, to the point Ben actually punches him or elbows him, breaks his nose. But because and there's this big scene where they're up in the helicopter finally, and Ben's doing CPR, and he's like, you broke my nose. He's like, you better hope you didn't just kill your wife, because your panic caused her delayed rescue.
Mm-hmm.
And that's basically, it sets the stage for how Ben is in real life with his wife. Mm-hmm. How he goes back, she's leaving. And it's interesting because when he comes back, he's like, oh, I can fix this. He believes he can rescue everyone. He believes he should rescue everyone. And what she says is, basically, I wish I was some nameless woman drowning, because I would get more attention that way than by being your wife. Yeah. But that idea of men smothering their wives, not with a pillow or anything, but what does that look like for a lot of people, or for you? I mean, I have my own story, but I've been talking for a couple minutes, so I want to hear you talk a little bit of how the uninitiated, the lone wolf concept, or the Messiah complex. He was at one point, he was so focused, as we mentioned, he doesn't know how many people he saved. He didn't keep track of that. He kept track of how many people he lost. And I think we're going to talk about that in a few minutes, of how damaging that aspect is. So to me, The Guardian isn't one of those inspirational stories. It's more a warning of, hey, if you don't get your stuff together, this is the path that you could choose. This is the path that might have gone. And in a lot of ways, Ben is the path that Jake could have followed if it weren't for the intervention of sort of what we call, for our purposes, the intervention of the father, of fathering him through that initiation. So going back to that question of smothering wives, whether, what does that look like for you, Dustin?
Yeah, it's so interesting to me. There's this theme of fear throughout the whole movie: fear of losing, fear of not living up to expectations, or fear of failure. And that, what's so interesting, how you brought up that scene at the very beginning. Gosh, I'm really convicted by this. But so often, if we are, so Kevin Costner, the reason he did what he did not want to lose anyone. He had such a fear of losing someone, which I think we'll talk a little bit about the motive of why we do everything. Why are we married? Why do we parent? Why do we have this job, that job? Why are we passionate about X, what fill in the blank, whatever you're passionate about? Well, I think about, of course, Kevin Costner's character, Ben, was very passionate about the Coast Guard. But what's his motive? He was really ruled, when we're introduced, by fear. We're introduced to him. Now, what he does in the moment, because he is very passionate about him in his true self, he's passionate about saving people, which is a beautiful thing. And so he's willing to break a guy's nose in order to save the woman. And what's so interesting to me, that in the context of our life with God, when we're passionate and moving towards something that is a valiant thing, saving someone in the water is a valiant thing. We're not bashing that. Now, his motive is a little bit more bent towards fear that we see in the beginning, but he's still passionate. And in the context of God and the greater story, he's doing something really valiant that he was created for. Right. And so often we are really trying to do something very valiant that we're passionate about. Yeah, we are wanting to do something so valiant, but the motive could be hurting the people that we love the most. around us. And yeah, it's so great that he saved that woman. But what that does is it sets the table for he's doing something with the motive of fear, but in the larger story, he's doing something that he really wants to do for himself with his own wife, but he doesn't know how.
Mm.
And so he goes back to the thing that he only knows. He goes back to the water and he saves. He saves another woman, another spouse, another man, because he doesn't know how to save his own spouse who he loves dearly. You see in the movie, he doesn't know how to handle her heart, but he does know how to jump in the water and save someone. And so he runs that over and over and over again and leaves her behind.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think of early in my marriage, my wife and I are this is both of our second marriages. And so, you come in with baggage, and it doesn't matter if it's your first marriage, you still come in with baggage.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah.
But for me, like, I was Ben for sure. To the point, we went to counseling for several years to work this out. And she's an amazing, probably like the Ben's wife in the movie, patient, waiting, hoping, seeing, like you said, the true self. But when your calling is motivated by the false self, as we see with that guy, then it really just becomes a poser. It becomes that false self manifesting and not the true calling and the true nature. Because he was called to be a rescuer, but he didn't rescue the one person who mattered most.
Mm-hmm.
He drowned. Basically, he lost his wife, as you mentioned in our pre-show or our pre-conversation. But this idea, for me, I was so insecure. Like she would avoid friends calling her because she knew that they wanted to go out, and she knew I couldn't handle it. Because like, oh, you'll be home at 11. If it's 11:01, I'm like pinging her. I was like, where are you? Where are you? Where are you? I'm convinced she's gone off with another guy or found somebody more interesting, or she just enjoys being out. She's realizing what a loser I am, basically. Thankfully, over the transformation of the gospel through also years of counseling for myself, to arrive at this point. You talk about one of the reasons I do this podcast is because if we can see things, whether it's see models of, role models in movies or stories to avoid, like I believe in this one, because Ben does let his marriage die. He does do the divorce papers. He doesn't fight for her. And as you mentioned, you've got to do the work. I hearing that my wife she's like, I can't respond to her. She's calling. I can't answer her because she wants a girls' night out. I can't do it because you can't handle it. And I was like, that's not who I want to be. And contrast that to this morning as we're recording, my wife is away at a nursing conference. And we're good. Right. And she went to Uganda earlier this year, and she's done these things now as sort of a proof of, yeah, I'm not freaking out. I'm not panicking. Usually there's still moments that something strikes because we're never, I don't think some things just are still, sort of weak spots in our armor, chinks in our armor.
Yes.
So we can get taken out by a little side swipe. For me, this last weekend, I was going to a meeting with some guys. We're getting ready for our men's retreat. And I had found out, like, I had planned on coming back and we were going to spend the whole day together. I was looking forward to it. We've been really busy, a lot of stuff. So I was like, oh, really some good time. And she said, oh, I have this thing. I've got to go. She's a nurse. She does an honor guard. So when there's a nurse who passes away in the Charlotte area, that she and other nurses will go and do something. They'll stand up at the funeral. They'll have a lamp. They'll all dress in like traditional nurse attire and do things to honor the passing of the nurse. It's super cool. And it's something that, we talk about that makes her heart come alive. And she's like, oh, I got to do this. I won't get home until, dinner time. And I was like, oh man, I'd really been looking forward to spending some time with you. And historically, what I would do is take that twinge of disappointment and use that to throw it at her and hurt her. As we used to, like, I'm really good at throwing javelins at people, at spears to inflict pain on their heart.
Yes.
And because, as we say, pain, hurting people hurt people. They take the pain of the shame and the self-hate or whatever it is, and they use that to inflict pain on the people around them. And I was like, I don't want to do that. I am disappointed, but it's like, it's okay that she's doing this, and it's okay that I'm disappointed, and it's going to be fine. And you're like, that's such a little thing, dude. You've been married for, 12 years, and it's a few hours on a weekend. And I was like, yeah, but I like spending time with my wife. Right. So wanting to engage in that sort of intimacy and relaxation, and just, we call it couch time, where we can look eyeball to eyeball and reaffirm the fact that we matter to each other. And I think I've told this story a couple times. A couple years ago, we were both working, and I felt God calling me to Stephanie. My wife's name is Stephanie, so her name means radiance. My mom did a cross stitch of her name in a verse, and she did mine. Mine's humility. And I was looking at that one day at the beginning of a year, and it's like God was like, see her radiance through your humility. And what does that mean? That means I let her work. I let her engage in what she does without smothering her, without grabbing on, without clinging. Oh, you need to work late? Okay. I'll make dinner. I'll take care of the house. What can I do to support her? In that stark contrast to she is my life preserver, right? Grabbing hold, smothering in that mental thing. But I think so many guys, so many of us either use her as the life preserver, or we look to other things. We look to work. Ben was a heavy drinker. We see that in the movie. It's interesting because towards the end, when he's like, hey, I'm sorry for all the phone calls. I know you wanted your space, right? She asked for space, and he kept calling her. And so that idea of, well, how can we keep from smothering and drowning and losing the most important one in our lives?
I can look in the mirror right now and see a whole lot of Ben's character in me throughout. I'm 39, so throughout my 20s and a lot of my 30s too, can see me running after really good things. So I started a nonprofit student ministry in the Atlanta area and did that for 10 years, and felt like I had a lot to prove to other people. Can I raise support? Can I start a ministry? Can I develop a board of directors? Can I, the list goes on and on. I would wear 15 different hats in a week. And, but one of those hats would not be a husband.
Yeah.
And so I could not articulate this in my 20s or even in my early 30s, but probably within the last 4 years, 2017 was a big year for me, 2017 and 18, of starting to name some things that were weighing me down, and therefore my wife and eventually my kids if I couldn't figure it out. So very passionate about ministry, and as someone who works in ministry right now, really could lean into my skill set, my talent, maybe even my gifting from God, and only invest all of my time towards that. And that left my wife in the dust, and
Right.
even my kids. And it was when our second kid came along in 2015, where 15, 16, 17 were really tough years, because I did not know how to be a father of infants. And what was surfacing was I did not know how to pursue my wife.
I'll give you a little insight. No one does. It's okay. You can mess up. They won't remember.
Right. No one does. But there's things that came up with like,
there you go. Yeah.
I have to be perfect, or I have to come through for everyone in the job, the infant, the nighttime feedings, the figure out how do I pursue my wife now that she's, recovering from giving birth. And now we have two kids and all of these things that I didn't know, fear of failure.
Mm-hmm.
And so this is where I'm drawn to this movie, because there's so much fear of failure, like wanting to be the best in everything. I have said to myself that I want to be the best at whatever it is, playing soccer in high school, in college, as a student, nonprofit, even internally competing against other nonprofits, and how many, it's silly stuff. But I am and was really good at it. And so I threw myself at it, because I did not know how to pursue my boys' young hearts, and I did not know how to pursue my wife's heart. And I wasn't willing to hear from God of how to partner with him to do that.
Right.
And my wife told me into 2015, I feel like you travel 4 nights a week, but you sleep in our bed.
Mm.
And so, a layer deeper, I'm not present. Even whenever I'm home, I'm off, and I'm out doing XYZ for this nonprofit, wearing the 15 different hats. Again, none of which are a husband or a father.
Right.
But I'm doing good work, right? I'm doing good work.
Saving lives, right?
Saving lives, right? Just like Ben. He's jumping in the water. I got to go save these people. It's up to me. And I'm leaving my wife and my kids in the dust. The good things that other people would say about Dustin in my 20s and early 30s, my wife and my kids now would be like, if I would have continued down that road, would be like, I don't know that person. Until thankfully, my wife says something like, I feel like you travel and you're not here. There needed to be a shift in my own heart, the plank in my own eye. I needed to do some digging, and it led me down a road of fortunately, it was some pretty deep depression in 2016, 17, 18, of me unearthing a lot of things and naming some things that I was believing some lies about things that I needed to be for other people that were not. I would not care about them on my deathbed. I care about my wife and my 3 boys. And so I need to shift some things in my priorities and ask God to do some work in my own heart, so that I can move towards the people that he has entrusted to my care underneath my roof. Because if that is not going well, then nothing else is going to go well. Right.
Morgan, in his Becoming a King book, tells a story that we both resonate with. It wasn't my experience with my dad, but just it's a reflection of who I don't want to be to my kids. And it's the story of this well-known, successful businessman died. And at his funeral, all these people got up talking about how generous he was, how much he spoke into their lives, how much he spent time with them. And his son was in the background listening to these stories like, that guy sounds amazing. I never knew that guy. Because I think we both have had very similar of, we can do this because we're good at it. And we pursue that. And we had a family meeting once, and when I was volunteering and doing this and that, my wife said, I feel like there's a chasm growing, and it's got the church in the middle of it. And it's like, well, I was doing good things, right? I was impacting lives. I was, what Ben must feel like, well, if I don't do that, somebody might die because I'm the fastest. I'm the best. I have all these records. If I was a little faster, maybe my number wasn't 22. Maybe it's 15 if I was only faster or stronger or better. And the danger of that being the focus, and for Ashton Kutcher's character, he was driven by the fact that 3 of the members of his swim team died one night. We find out in the movie, and he's got their names or their initials tattooed on the inside of his arm. And what drives him to swim is, and I'm going to play this clip because, we're like 30 minutes in, let's do a clip, right? But this clip where Ben finds out why Jake wants to swim, but I think it's so many of us, we experience salvation. We experience some transformation and it drives us, but then it's almost like our drivenness is to make up for our past wrongs.
Mm-hmm.
And I think Ashton Kutcher's voice in this clip reflects how we think we've got it all under control.
Mm-hmm.
I know what it's like to lose a team.
Yeah. What about living in a small town where everyone thinks that you killed their brother or their son or their best friend? You know about that?
Kind of small town where everyone still waves to everyone, just not to you. I read the report, Jake. Your blood alcohol was zipped that night. I'm guessing there was a flip for designated driver. You lost.
I guess that just makes it all go away, huh?
No, it doesn't make it all right. It just makes it an accident. At least that's how it reads. You were 16 years old, Jake. I'm not your priest, but if I was, I think maybe you deserve a pass.
You're giving me a pass? You just think you know everything with your psychobabble bullshit. Why am I here? Why are you here? Huh? You're too old to be doing this. You're washed up here. You don't want to be teaching a bunch of kids in a pool, am I right? I don't give a shit what you read or who you talk to. You don't know about me. I have me under control.
I can see that.
I love that scene where he's like, I got me under control. Obviously, he does not. And what you mentioned about the plank and the speck, he's throwing back the heat. He's like, what are you doing here, old man? And it's interesting. I think Ben is being to Jake what he never had.
Mm-hmm.
He never had somebody to call him out, to refocus and say, look, that's an accident. And it's interesting in another clip, he's like, I don't know how to deal with the survivor guilt because I can't answer that for myself. I can't answer that for you. But what is motivating our gifting? What is motivating our passion? Because we can drown our wives just the same as smothering as we can by neglect, by distraction, by spending our focus on our fear. We can say, I'm going to do everything I can not to crush my marriage, but that pressure actually crushes the marriage,
Mm-hmm.
right? Because the motivation is fear.
Right.
So the question is how, right? How can we avoid becoming Ben? How can we,
Mm-hmm.
what are we in service to? Are we,
Right.
What is driving us? What is our motivation? Truly and honestly. Because if we're motivated by all the failures, we're just going to keep failing. It's, what I can't remember the story or who said it, but that story of kids who grew up with a horrible father and issues with fatherhood, whatever. I'm not going to be like my dad. I'm not going to be like my dad. But because all they focus on is their dad and how their dad let them down, they become just like him.
Mm-hmm.
And we see Jake set aside that rescue mission to return for his girlfriend. I can't remember her name now. But he comes back and he's like, I don't want casual. I'm not in it for this. I'm in it for serious. And it again, there's gaps in the storytelling.
Mm-hmm.
But you can read into it is that life isn't enough. I mean, Ben ended up giving his life to the life. He gave
Mm-hmm.
his life sort of so that Jake could live, right? But at the same time, he gave his life to his work and not his wife.
Mm-hmm.
And so the question becomes, how do we answer this question? And it's a question they ask sort of over the scene is Ben's funeral after he died. But this idea of what makes a legend, and it's been something that's driven us, I think, in our transformation of asking these deeper questions. So this question of what makes a legend as they're processing Ben's passing.
What makes a legend? Is it what someone did when they were alive?
Randall never was much for this sort of thing.
Or how they're remembered after they're gone?
What they did while they're alive, that's your resume. How you're remembered, that's your eulogy. So how can we change the path, right? How can we avoid Ben's ending?
Mm-hmm. The first time this came up for me in my life was in college. And I heard someone give a message. It was at FCA. I went to Clemson in South Carolina.
Go Tigers.
And yeah, go Tigers. And it was a guy that gave this message, and the message was titled The Dash. And it was all about on your tombstone, there's a birth date, and there's a death date, and there's a dash. And it was all about what image could you place on that dash, or what word could you place on that dash that represents your life? And he talked about the people around, on your deathbed or at your funeral. What words are they going to say? And at early 20s, I'm like, wow, I got a lot of life left. And then he went on to share some stories about a 10-year-old that passed and the words shared, and then a 20-year-old and 30, and went by decade with 5 or 6 examples. And that was the first time that it really dawned on me that's like, because I have always had as a bit of a perfectionist, I've always had a fear of failure.
Yeah.
And it's like, what am I trying? What am I failing at? What am I going to risk and try some things? And then as I went into my 30s and now married, I'm 39, married for 15 years with 3 boys. The question you pose is how do we leave a legend? Well, I have to ask myself the question, whether you're listening and you're single and always been single, or you're on your second marriage, or you have no kids, or you have a lot of kids, or what is the kingdom that God has given us is the question I have to ask myself. Who are the people that God has entrusted to my care? And it starts with me. It starts with my own heart and what's going on with me. Why do I have a fear of failure? Why am I being ruled by fear at times? And Jesus has given me all power and all authority. When he ascended, he said, the Father has given me all power and all authority on heaven and on earth. And now I give it to you. And I want to enforce that power as I walk with Jesus. I want to enforce that power as I go throughout my day. And not only enforce that in ways that I'm really good at operating without God. Because I can go execute a job. I can go fill my gas tank. I can pay bills. I can eat. I can order things to take care of my household and make a living with a job. I can do all that without God if I really want to. And I can create a secure space without God. But if I'm willing to risk and do it with God, and he takes me on an adventure to do things that, holy smokes, I might actually fail at that. And he's like, yeah, you might, but I'm right here with you.
Right.
And I don't let go. I know we're on audio. He doesn't grab our hand. He grabs a hold of our arm because I'm going to let go. And he knows that. And as I let go, which I have, I'm hurting other people around me that he's entrusted to my care. And God's primary work is he's looking for who he can entrust his power to. That's his primary work. Who can he entrust his power and authority and love to care for people? And he's entrusted a wife and 3 boys to me. And that is the number one. Those 4 people are the people that I want to do everything for. It's why I train as a man. It's why I run. It's why I do have a job, because I want to care for them. I do not do things in my life, and I don't think any man or any woman can be on their deathbed and say that they are satisfied with the job that they did in their life if their only focus was their job or what they were passionate about necessarily. It's naming the people who God has entrusted to them to care for, and only fighting for those people in their circle. Or as I think a quote said, I don't fight for the things that are in front of me, job, people, achievement, accumulation of things. I fight for the people who are behind me. And naming the people who are around me or behind me that I want to protect as a man, that gives me motivation to risk being the person that God has created me to be. And yes, do things that I'm passionate about. But if God's leading me to try some other things because it's going to make my wife better, or it's going to make my kids better, and I'm going to be able to provide for them more, protect them more, give them a small picture of our Heavenly Father, because I'm becoming the man that I was meant to be, then great. And I think that's not being ruled by fear and perfectionism, and which can lead to shame for me, which sent me into some deep depression, but being ruled by love and the love for, yes, of course, God, and also love for myself, to get rid of that self-hatred and that self-condemnation so that I can be the man for my wife, Stephanie. Also, my wife's name is Stephanie, and the word radiance, I've also looked that up, and I think that's beautiful. And then my 3 boys, Finn, Ryder, and Jude. And that's how I can wake up every morning and not become Ben, which I was on the road to. I was Ben in my 20s and early 30s.
Yeah, I love that idea. What you said is our kingdom starts with ourselves. And if I don't handle my heart well, how can I handle anyone else's? Mm-hmm. If I am critical and judgmental and condemning to myself, and it could be easy stuff. It could be, you don't like looking at yourself in the mirror. It's like, oh, you're fat, you're lazy, you don't, eat right, you don't exercise enough, you don't work hard enough, you don't do enough. If that's how you're treating your heart, it's going to reflect. It may not reflect eventually, but when the shit hits the fan, rubber meets the road, insert whatever cliche, when that starts, that's how you're going to treat everyone else. Mm-hmm. So it does, the other idea that if I want my life more full of the things of God, of things that matter, we've got to remove the stuff that doesn't. Like, our lives are pretty full. So what needs to be removed so that what you can put in is good? And it might be good stuff, but you got to put in better stuff. It might be, I got to stop doing that so I can start doing this. You can't just keep adding and adding and adding. You got to clear out the junk drawer in order to organize it. Because otherwise, like you said, we're just destined to go down that road. Mm-hmm. So Dustin, I know you got to jump. You got a doctor's appointment to deal with that persistent cough of yours. So I appreciate you adjusting and squeezing time in. And I'll put something on the YouTube, because there is a scene, video scene that I captured that I think can speak to where Charlie finally defeats his fear, and the response of the men around him.
I love that.
It's such a visual scene. Yeah, Dustin's bummed. He's like, I wanted to do that, but we got it. It's about following what God gives us, right? We can't do it all. So what's the portion that we can pursue and appreciate? It's not, you can't count the losses. You've got to say, what positive impact can I have? Have I had? Who matters most? Who are the most important people? Who are the ones most necessary to rescue? And again, that starts with our own heart. Guard your heart, as we mentioned many times in our conversations, Dustin. Beautiful. And so appreciate this time. Like you said, you opened up. My goal is to open up doors to God that draw me closer, that I see, that I get more understanding of myself and my Father in heaven. And once again, you nailed that checkbox. So well done.
Yeah, me too. I cherish our conversations, and I love that movies can bring this out in me, and both emotion and passion and clarity of, oh, wow, Jesus, is this what you do for me? Is this how you've rescued me? And is this who you see me as? Both in the, I need to get rid of that false self and live in the trueness of who I am. And God is a very adventurous God. He is very, very good, but he is not safe. Right. And he sends us out into the wilderness. He sends us out into the rough oceans and says, yes, I'm with you. And even Jesus himself in the storm, he's like, I'm going to take a nap.
Yeah, you got this. You're all right.
He was asleep on the boat. Did you bring us out here to kill us? No, I brought you out here to conquer your fear.
Yeah.
And Jesus is not safe, but he does want to help us conquer our own fears so we are not ruled by it, so we can live in freedom of loving ourselves and caring for ourselves so that we can then do that for other people. And that clip of Charlie is such a beautiful example of that. I'm so glad you're showing that.
So, yeah, check us out on the YouTube channel, subscribe, do all the things. So, Dustin, I look forward to whatever our next conversation will be. I'm sure it's going to be a good one. I can't wait. So, I hope you guys enjoyed it. This has been Paul McDonald and Dustin Oprea talking about The Guardian. And I hope you join us next time here on the Men at the Movies podcast.
Something inside has been awakened. I can no longer be who I was before. But if I am no longer who I was, who am I to be?